Hello, I'm Noel Kingsbury, and with Annie Gelfoyle, together we run Garden Masterclass. Welcome to our YouTube channel. We put here the recordings from the session we do every Thursday evening at 6 o'clock London time, a practice we started during the April 2020 lockdown as a way of reaching out to the global garden and landscape community. We hope you enjoy this recording, but also please do check out our website for all the amazing range of information-packed webinar and workshop recordings we have. Maybe consider joining us because members get access to our vast archive of free material as well as discounts on the webinar recordings. We've also recently started a podcast channel on Substack. So we do a weekly podcast so that's a way of accessing a lot of our recorded material that you can listen to whilst you're digging or driving or watering or whatever else. So I very much hope you enjoy this recording and looking forward to keeping in contact.
Welcome to Garden Masterclass. My name is Richard. Annie and Noel are in Bergamo in Italy at the Landscape Festival having a marvelous time. So I'm holding the fort this evening with Juliet, Juliet Sargeant, who's going to be talking to us very soon. You might see Juliet down in the left-hand part of your screens. We're not sure.
Hi, everybody.
Having some fun technical issues, but we'll get over those. Thanks so much for joining us, wherever you're joining us from. My name is Richard, and I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping for Garden Masterclass. So Annie and Noel have launched a new website, which is very exciting. Please go and have a visit. They're still shaking things down in terms of some of the pages, but there's a lot of stuff on there. Some things coming up. The last live event that we have of the year is going to be up north in Yorkshire. So that's at Raby Castle. And it's an in-depth into the making of the gardens of Raby Castle, which is a very historic castle for those that don't know that, and if you can make it, it's an extraordinary place. I have yet to visit. So that's with Alistair, and Annie, I believe, is going to be there, designing for public settings, and preempting different user groups amongst many more aspects. It's quite an in-depth course. So that's for the last live event, if you can make it up to Yorkshire. Noel and Nigel's and Cashin Smith's naturalistic planting design course is starting up on the 29th of September, and that's till the 9th of March. I think that's 10 sessions, which I have done. It's kind of gone from strength to strength. It's a really popular class, online sessions, and a wonderful thing to take you through the autumn and winter months. Highly recommend that one. And then on the 8th of October to the 26th of November, there's a beginning in SketchUp workshop online for any of you who haven't tried out this CAD program. It's a great way to have a go if you're sort of, or like me, actually like to use pen and paper and pencil and design in that way, and perhaps you want to have a go at getting on the screen and playing with one of those CAD programs. So that's the SketchUp course. And yeah, as I say, check out the new website. There's a lot on there. Annie and Noel are coming up with new events, live events for next year. A lot of fantastic online courses. But without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you to Juliet Sargeant this evening. Some of you may know Juliet very well. She's the head of the Sussex Gardening School. And Juliet's going to talk to us about soil, what's going on currently, where her interest in creating the book that she's written, soil, starting with soil, simple steps for a thriving garden, and her beginnings with that, and then where she's at currently with all of that. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Juliet. Take it away, Juliet. Oh, and just to say, if anybody has, excuse me, Anything to add into the chat box, please go ahead. If you've got any questions, we can try and bring them up at the end. Thanks, Juliet.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So yes, I would like to use this time together to invite you to think about soil and perhaps rethink the way that you've thought about soil in the past. But just to tell you a little bit about myself, I've been designing gardens for 30 years now. And I have to admit, in that time, I think I probably haven't given enough thought to the subject of soil. It's you know, weirdly, it's a sort of recent delve into soil for me. So I've been designing gardens, and occasionally I get the call from the producers of Radio 4's Gardeners Question Time. So I go regularly onto the panel. And then the other string to my bow is that I run my Sussex Garden School, which is really born out of my love of all sorts of creativity. So we have different tutors who teach crafts and garden design and planting and hands-on gardening for homeowners. Really, we like to cover anything that is inspired by nature and the landscape. So it's not just garden design, it's all sorts of creativity inspired by the landscape. And people come and join us for the day to learn a new skill and just relax and absorb the creativity that one gets in the landscape and in gardens. But this evening, we are going to talk about soil, and thank you for joining me, because it's lovely to have this opportunity to share with you my new book, which is called Start with Soil: Simple Steps for a Thriving Garden. And it was written in collaboration with the scientists at Kew, which was quite scary for me. But fortunately, they were very supportive and didn't really want to change anything. So that was great. But I will tell you now how I came to even write the book. I have extended family in East Africa, a sort of quite a remote part of Tanzania and in East Africa. And a few years ago, I went to see the family, and they are subsistence farmers. So they grow the food that they need to eat. And they said to me that they've been struggling for several years because their crops, year on year, their crops were failing. And they said that the government had promised time and again to send soil scientists to help them, but nobody had turned up. And they were, you know, their crops are getting worse and worse every year. And when I went to the farm, I just sort of bent down and took a handful of soil. It's very, very sandy soil, and I just thought, this soil looks dreadful. You know, it appeared to have no organic matter, no moisture. It really looked dead. So I thought the best thing was to take a sample and send it off to the RHS for testing. And sure enough, the texture, the soil texture showed very low organic matter, and in terms of phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, sort of almost undetectable levels. So very, very poor and dead soil. And that got me thinking, really, about the importance of soil globally. You know, of course, we enjoy gardening, but if you're anything like me, growing vegetables is a pleasure, but it's not what our family rely on to eat. It's a hobby. If my tomatoes fail one summer, I just nip down to the supermarket and buy some more. But it's very different in different parts of the world. So I really started to think about the global situation with soil. And then I also got the opportunity to create a Chelsea garden in 2022. I was invited by some sponsors, Project Giving Back, to create a garden in celebration of Blue Peter. You'll all know Blue Peter, the sort of iconic children's programme. And the sponsors wanted to celebrate the work that the BBC and Blue Peter had done for children during lockdown. The way they'd supported children's learning with television programs, and they wanted to sort of highlight this work and say thank you to Blue Peter and the BBC. So I was invited to create a garden in celebration of Blue Peter, but the actual subject I could choose. I could choose anything that I wanted to. And having been thinking about soil, I thought, well, children these days, they understand about climate change, they understand about carbon footprint, and they are very concerned with environmental issues. But I thought they don't really know about the problems, the global problems with soil degradation. And I thought, well, if you can't talk about soil at the Chelsea Flower Show, where can you talk about soil? So I thought that's what we'll do. We will do a soil garden for children. And of course, hopefully the adults will be interested as well. So that was how we ended up with this garden, which was bright and colourful. And I tried to use sort of creativity to invite children to think about soil, which you might imagine, you know, would be a difficult one to engage children, people with. So we used colour, we used art, sculpture to engage people with the subject of soil. And around the garden, I had little sentences really just to pique people's interest, invite people to think about soil. So this was one saying soil forms slowly from rock. And then another one, plants protect the soil. And then when you move further around the garden, you would see compost feeds our soil. And the idea was that these little sentences would just invite people to think more deeply. So I thought these three sentences I would use as the structure really of my talk this evening, and we'll delve a little bit more into those three statements and just unpick them a little bit. So if we start with soil forms slowly from rock, what happens, you may remember if you learnt this at school, what happens is that both the physical action of rain and frost breaking up rocks, and then the chemical actions of acid rain over time break up rocks, and they crumble down and become sort of ground down into small particles, which form the mineral particles, the mineral part of soil. So soil over many, many years gradually forms from rock, and then organic matter, plants and animals die or excrete into the soil, and you get this mixture of organic matter from the living beings and minerals from the rock. And soil is a combination of those minerals and the organic matter. And through that mixture of organic matter and minerals that we as human beings, and also all living animals, get the essential elements of life. And the essential elements of life are numerous, too numerous for me to mention now. But I thought if I just take a couple of examples to illustrate my point. So potassium and phosphorus are essential elements for us and for animals and plants living. So that potassium and that phosphorus have come from the grinding down of rocks, as I mentioned. But the problem is, if those elements are in the soil, how do they actually get into our bodies? How do we get them into our bodies so that our bodies can use them for our biological processes? And the marvelous thing is that potassium and phosphorus get into our bodies via plants. The plants take up the potassium and phosphorus. We then eat the plants, and that's how they get into our bodies. But that all happens with the help of the living organisms that are in the soil. In order for the plant to take up the potassium and the phosphorus, the plants need the help of soil organisms, particularly fungi and bacteria, which are working away all the time to change the potassium and the phosphorus into forms that can be taken up by the plants, and then we eat them. So you've got this sort of marvelous complex system whereby the soil, the organisms within the soil, and the plants are all working together in order to produce these essential elements in a digestible form that we can eat. And then also in the air, floating about as carbon dioxide and nitrogen, are the elements nitrogen and carbon. And again, the question is, they're floating about in the air, but how do we get them into our bodies in order to use them as essential elements of life? And similarly, we get them because the plants take them in, and then we eat the plants. So we are all reliant on plants for our survival, and we're also reliant on the soil because the plants are reliant on the soil. You can see that soil feeds the 80 billion human beings and other species that are on this planet. It's essential for our landscapes and the animals that live on those landscapes. It's essential for our food, whether that food is plants or whether that food is other animals. Without the soil and the living organisms within the soil, none of that would be possible. So this is just a summary slide to show potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon, and all those other essential nutrients are available in that way through the plants and the soil. And then, of course, because they're all locked up in the plants, when the plants die, that's when those nutrients get recycled back into the soil. And that's why the whole composting and allowing that plant material to go back into the soil is so important. So if you think back to my first slide of my family's farm in Tanzania, the problem has arisen because they're not composting. They're not putting those nutrients back into the soil. So the soil isn't being replenished with plant matter, organic fibrous material, and it's not being replenished with the carbon, the nitrogen, the potassium, the phosphorus, etc. And the soil over many years becomes depleted. And that is a global problem that's going on. I haven't got time to go into the whole carbon storage thing, but I did just want to flag that one thing that people often overlook is the tremendously important role that soil plays in locking in carbon. We all know that that trees and plants store carbon, but the soil itself also stores carbon and holds 80% of the carbon that's stored on land. So tremendously important, but very much overlooked. But just a brief mention of that. So what's the problem? The problem is that soil is being eroded. Year on year, more soil is being lost to wind erosion and water erosion than can replenish in time, because that whole weathering process that I mentioned at the beginning, the weathering of the rocks, takes many, many years, but erosion happens very quickly. So we're actually losing topsoil faster than it's being replenished. And you might think, well, we're fine in the UK, or maybe fine in Europe, you know, in our minds we might be thinking of deserts with soil, you know, blowing away in the wind, but actually it's happening everywhere. It's happening in the UK, it's happening in Europe, that soil is being degraded, and the statistic that's generally accepted is that 40% of the soil worldwide is degraded in some way, is not as healthy, or as thick. The topsoil is not as thick as it should be. If our international friends will just forgive me for a moment talking about the UK, again, you might think, well, surely it's the farmers that are causing all these problems by over-tilling or using fertilizers, and what's it got to do with me as a gardener? But actually, yes, it's true that most of land use goes to agriculture, and a substantial proportion, about 20% in the UK, goes to forestry, open land and water. But I would say a small but significant percentage, nearly 5% of land use, is residential gardens, people's home gardens. And you might say, oh, well, that's only 5%, but it is, you know, it's a significant percentage. And so I do think that it's worth us as individual gardeners thinking about the practices that we use in our own gardens. If you think about all our gardens added up, if we all try and look after the soil in our own gardens, then working together, we can make a significant difference. And of course, in other countries, you'll have your own statistics for that. So, as I said, many of the farming practices, things like tilling and having vast monocultures and over irrigating, using chemicals, all those things contribute to the destruction of soil and reducing the biodiversity of the soil. And of course, if you reduce the biodiversity of the soil, then everything else that comes after that, the plants, the insects, the higher animal forms, are also reduced in their biodiversity. It starts with the soil. Also, many of our own gardening practices do have a detrimental effect, and conversely could have a positive effect on the soil. And that's what I want to really invite you to think about, your own practices as home gardeners, professional gardeners, garden makers in general, garden designers, garden makers in general. So if we divide it up, this is the way that I tend to think about it when I'm making gardens, working in gardens. I think about plant choices. Am I choosing the right plants to look after the soil in this garden? And what are the gardening, the physical gardening practices that I'm undertaking in this space? Are they the kind of garden practices that are good for the soil? And then in my own context as a garden designer, I think about the actual design of the garden, the build phase of the garden, and how I specify things. How are they going to affect the soil? All of them can make a difference. So to give you a couple of examples. So this is a garden we designed a few years ago. It's a wedding venue. And so the brief was for it to be, you know, fairly traditional, colourful, ornamental, all year interest wedding garden to give sort of colourful delight for everybody. So it was a very traditional brief, traditional project. And in order to create a garden like that, you really need this sort of soil, you know, the sort of nirvana of soils, moist, crumbly, smells fresh, and has lots of organic matter. So in order to create a traditional, or you might even say English style garden, this is what we need. Whereas I think for a lot of people, this is probably more like what you've got. Either thick clay or quite sort of light sandy soil that doesn't look particularly great. And this was the sort of soil we had to deal with on that site. So we did what most people would do. We brought in lots of organic matter to improve the soil. So great lorry loads of manure and compost were trundled into the site, and we improved the soil. And I put the word improve in quotation marks because we all talk about, oh, we must improve the soil, we improve the soil. But I pose the question to you, what does improve mean? First of all, does the soil need improving? And improving it into what, or improving it from what to what? In this case, I would still argue we didn't need to improve the soil because we were going for a sort of blousy traditional look. But we will explore a little bit more whether that's always necessary. So this was treating it traditionally by adding organic matter, which of course is anything. Organic matter is anything that used to be a plant. The idea being that you're putting back into the soil that fiber, that organic matter, and the nutrients that I mentioned before. Is there another way to survive a poor soil? If you have a soil that doesn't look particularly great, can you, rather than going for the blousy traditional English garden that needs soil improvement, can you, what I call, learn to love the local look and work with the soil that you have? Can you create a garden with plants that are actually adapted to the soil that's already there, and choose plants that are resilient to what's on site? And give you an example from my own experience. I live in Sussex, so this is the sort of soil that I deal with in my garden and on my allotment. Really, really thin, I mean, centimetres thin topsoil on top of solid chalk. So the soil is free draining, low in nutrients, dry, dusty. But if I go for a walk on the South Downs, just a mile or so, well, actually, no, just a few meters away, the South Downs starts, this is what I see. I see the most beautiful landscape. In fact, an internationally recognized landscape. The Chalk Downs are protected, internationally recognized, not just for their beauty, but for their biodiversity and importance, habitat importance. So how is it that this is going on that really thin, chalky soil? And the answer, of course, is that nature is resilient, and there is biodiversity in the kind of plants that can be adapted or are adapted to this shallow, chalky soil. And it's beautiful, but it's not that blousy English garden look. And the question that occurs to me is it time? I know this is a controversial, and I know it might be difficult to think about, but is it time in some instances to let go of our sort of traditional view of what we want from a garden? With climate change, with soil degradation, are our gardens going to look different in the coming years? So I would say that another way to survive soil like mine, perhaps a poor chalky soil or a sandy soil, is to work with what you have. And as I say, this is what I in particular am dealing with. There's an advantage to this, not just sort of looking after the soil and biodiversity. I think that there's a sort of cultural and aesthetic advantage to it as well. What you can see here is a traditional Sussex walling technique. It's called bungaroosh. around here, and you see walls like this all around where I live, in Brighton and around Sussex. And basically it's gathering flints out of the fields. As they get washed up in the winter, they come to the surface of the soil, and traditionally the farmers would just pick the flints out, and they were waste material because the farmers didn't want them in the fields. They'd pile them up at the side of the fields, and people would use them to make walls. And then old bricks and bits of stone would all be just sort of bunged in to the bungarouche wall. So it was a very thrifty, very sensible use of natural materials and waste materials. And it gives Sussex a particular vernacular, a particular look. And then out of that, you get people who are tremendously skilled. And in your own areas, you'll have similar versions of this. So this is Kieran making a flint wall out of, admittedly, what is very expensive flints these days. But in the old days, they were just waste material. So Kieran, has a tremendous talent at creating these flint walls and bungarouche walls. This is a garden we created for a Sussex barn, and you can see there's a flint wall, and the barn itself is made of flint walls. So you get this local vernacular. And this is a project that we're working on at the moment. Again, a listed barn made of flint walls, and then you see behind this one here, a brick barn. Sorry, it's gone the wrong way. And what I wanted to do in creating the garden for this project was to think about that sort of use of local materials and local soil, and create a garden that was very much of the place and had a local distinctiveness, using plants that were happy in the soil there on the site. Just to give you a bit more context about the project itself, Sandy Rendell Architects are designing the house, and they also wanted to create, yes, a modern house, but one that speaks of its place. And so they're using this idea of the flints and the bungarouche to create the walling of the house. And you can see that the wall starts low down with just flint, and then gradually brick gets added into it, and then you end up with just brick on top. So there's this beautiful sort of phasing as you work up the wall. So the architecture is designed to be locally distinct. The garden needs to speak of the place. And of course, though using that concept, that ideology, you end up with hopefully a sustainable or more sustainable project. This is a lovely 3D that Sandy Rendell Architects created for the project. So our job is to create a garden for this house. And when I went to site, this is what I saw. It's an old farm, so it was tarmac, concrete, but of course, loads and loads of wildflowers just growing out of the tarmac, in the rubble. This is some kind of Tanacetum chamomile thing. There were verbascums, there was wild oregano, thyme, the sort of things that you would see up on the downs. And I thought, well, if these things are growing here in this rubble with nobody having done anything for years on end, can we create a rubble garden? And that's our plan for this side of the garden. And doing my research, of course, many of you will know the work of John Little. I thought this is exactly what I need to do for this stonery project. The land is already shallow topsoil on chalk. There's old tarmac, broken concrete already on site. They're demolishing a house, so we're going to get even more rubble. And it makes sense. It makes sense. I think at this stage, I have to say, I do have concerns about moving lorry loads of sand and rubble in order to do this when your soil is perfectly good. I think that's a more debatable issue. But on this particular site, I think, and on John's site, which is a sandy site already, I think there's a lot to be learned from these mosaic habitats and this way of creating gardens. These are some photos that John sent me to show to you of his garden under construction, and you can see there's already the sandy soil, but what he's doing is creating microclimates by having mounds of sand, mounds of rubble, of different makeups in order to create different environments, different microclimates around the garden. And so back at Stonery, we decided to use a lot of native plants, but also plants that aren't necessarily native but are adapted to those conditions, and use resilient plants that would survive and thrive in this poor soil. And I call this a soil-led approach to gardening and creating gardens. But I would say it's similar to right plant, right place, which of course you'll all know about, but it's with an emphasis on, with a real emphasis on the soil, because I think over the years, certainly myself, and I think other people, we sort of think, oh yes, right plant, right place, but then we start improving the soil, which is not so much right plant, right place, if you think about the soil. So it's this soil-led approach that I want to emphasize. Then moving on to the next sort of heading, really, I wanted to think about this idea of protecting the soil from compaction, erosion, damage. And of course, the number one thing that you can do is plant plants, because the leaf cover protects the soil physically from physical impacts, and the roots underneath the soil knit it together and help to prevent erosion. So planting is the first thing you can do, and I know I don't need to ask you guys to plant. It's what you like doing all day, every day. But we do need to think about other things that we're doing to the soil. And this was the first time that I saw boreholes going in. And I just, I was aghast, really, because of course, on one hand, ground source heat pumps, boreholes are a good thing, but it really made me think about the whole idea of, cracking eggs to make an omelette, the amount of damage that we can do to a garden in order to make a garden. And I think particularly garden designers need to think about that. We like to think of ourselves as the good guys because we're making gardens, we're planting trees, we work all day with nature and greenery. But I think we do quite a lot of damage as well. So this idea of breaking eggs to make an omelette. When we make a garden, we clear the site very often, sometimes, with little thought to what we're clearing away. Then we build, often bringing in loads of concrete. Then we plant. Are we planting the right things? And then we maintain. How are we maintaining? So all these stages, I think, certainly in my own practice, there's room for improvement. So just to unpick a couple of those points, I'm very aware when we move into a new site clearing of the importance of protecting what's there, analysing first, really looking at what's there, analysing, protecting the trees, the wildflowers, and the biodiversity that's already there. And that includes the soil and the biodiversity within the soil. So a couple of nightmare slides of what not to do. These are slides from sites where I've sort of walked onto site and seen stuff like this going on. you know, there's absolutely no reason. This is about to become a planting bed. So there's no reason for it to be in this condition, used as a dumping ground for builders sand, which is full of contaminants, and piles of cement. There's really no need for that to be happening. And this is an oak tree. The tree you can see in the background is an oak tree, which has had a pile of soil around its roots for months on end, and again a dumping ground used within its tree canopy. So when we're thinking about sustainable garden situations, there is this whole balance, I think, to be achieved. Unfortunately, we are still in a situation where often choosing the sustainable way to go is more expensive. It's still, you know, expensive. So we need to balance those benefits of creating gardens, the benefits to people, the benefits to the environment, improving heat resilience, flood resilience, carbon sequestration, the way that plants clean the air for us. All those benefits come from creating gardens. But of course, the costs of creating gardens are financial and environmental. So we're trying to create these gardens, which are a good thing, but reducing the cost of creating those gardens. So another project with that in mind, we did quite a few years ago now, back in 2009, and this was a garden up near Oxford, and this was the state of the garden. Well, actually, this was after we'd done some clearing. When I first saw the garden, the brambles were head high and I couldn't even get in there. And I said to the client, well, we're going to have to clear it just to look at it. And when we did get rid of the brambles, this is what we saw. So you might argue that actually anything we did would make it better. That's true. The brief was that it was in a site of outstanding natural beauty and what was special scientific interest in those days. So the clients wanted to create something that looked like the riverside as you go down the river near Oxford and didn't look like a domestic garden, to clear it and increase the biodiversity of the site. So a lot of the site, it was a spit of land going out into the river, so we called it Culham Island. And there was a lot of erosion that had happened, and people had poured concrete and used old scaffolding poles to try and shore up the banks of the island. So we did a lot of work on those banks with marginal mattresses and biodegradable marginal mattresses, and basically re-established the banks. And we had to clear the whole thing. We had to do tree felling because there were lots of crack willows which were dangerous. But we kept what we could, and then very quickly did as much tree planting as we could, because I was worried about the spring when the floodwaters come. This whole well, most of the island gets flooded in spring. When the floodwaters come, if you've felled all the trees or felled a lot of trees, there's a risk, of course, that you'll get soil erosion. So we planted as quickly as we could and tried to re-establish things. And very, very quickly, this was planting. I think this would have been, let me think about timings. I think this would have been planting, yes, in it's sort of summer, autumn time. But then very, very quickly, in the middle of the next growing season, the whole thing comes back to life. And that's what I love about working by water. Of course, things do establish very, very quickly. And then this is what it ended up looking like. So the idea was that it didn't look like a domestic garden, that it looked as natural and wild as possible. We used natives where we could, but in order to have enough of a palette to work with, and in order to have the biodiversity that we were aiming for, we did use non-natives but obviously native-looking non-natives, if you see what I mean. And it was wonderful because very, very quickly, these two chaps, when I went to site, these two chaps were singing in a hedge. The first time I went back, which was lovely to see because there was really absolutely nothing there to begin with, and we were very fortunate to be awarded the Sustainability Award by the Society of Garden Designers. And then we move on to the next one, compost feeds our soil. Richard, how am I doing for time? Am I okay?
You're doing great. We've got 15 minutes left. You're doing great. If anybody has any questions or any comments at all, then to pop them into the chat. But it's fantastic. Yeah, carry on.
Thank you. So let's think about this compost feeds our soil, or what we're really talking about is the life within the soil, the microorganisms, the mini beasts within the soil. Now, I do have to give you one clarification. So when I talk about can we just work with the soil that we've got, even if you've got a chalky or very poor sandy soil, I'm talking about ornamental planting, because of course, if you want to grow food, if you're growing fruit and vegetables, then you do need that sort of lovely, crumbly, moist, fertile soil. That was the whole problem for my family in Tanzania, that they needed that fertility in the soil. So vegetables, food, does need an improved soil. But how do we do it? If we feel that we do need to improve the soil, how do we do it? This is a garden that we created a few years ago. Again, it's a traditional Sussex English style garden, and that again is the kind of soil garden that needs fertile soil. And I call it the sort of Magimix approach to improving soil. The idea that if you add in manure or organic matter, and then you add in fertilizers, and sort of mix it all up, then everything will be fine afterwards. But this sort of digging that we're traditionally used to doing, this Magimix, mixing stuff into the soil, of course, has its damaging side, particularly when you think about the structure of the soil. Soil is naturally laid down in layers. You've got the topsoil, the subsoil, and then the layers underneath that. And the more that we dig, the more that we disrupt the structure of the soil, those layers, but also the very delicate and fine networks within the soil are disrupted as we dig. And so really, the less that we dig and the less that we interfere with the soil and let the microorganisms, the mini beasts, the worms get on with life, and the fungi get on with life, the better. So if you do need to add organic matter, try and do it with as little disruption as possible. Before I go on to that, just to cover the point about what organic matter is actually doing. It's improving the water holding capacity of the soil and the nutrient holding capacity, and of course adding living organisms. If you're adding manure or compost, you're adding living organisms and some nutrients. But as I mentioned, there is this downside to improving the soil. By adding fertilizers, we could be upsetting the natural homeostatic balance of the soil. Of course, synthetic fertilizers and the haulage of organic matter, compost or manure, has its own carbon footprint. Nitrogenous fertilizers do produce a nitrous oxide greenhouse gas effect. There's the financial expense. A very, very rich, fertile soil can lead to what I call spoilt plants that need watering in the summer because they're used to a moisture retentive soil. And so I suppose the question is now, with long hot summers, with climate change, should we be growing our plants to be more resilient and not spoiling them? And then there's that loss of local distinctiveness that I mentioned, that if all our gardens look the same, sort of English style, blousy, are we actually missing a trick with the opportunity to create gardens that speak more of their locality? As I said just now, we're possibly disrupting the soil profile when we dig and the soil structure when we dig. So those are the things I think to think about, that improving soil can have its downsides. So that leads me to something that a lot of you will know about, the idea of no dig. Do we really need to dig in with this sort of Magimix approach? And I think not. A lot of people now have stopped digging because if you just lay a thick layer of organic matter, compost or manure, on the surface of your soil, you'll find that in time the worms and the rain and the mini beasts will just take it down into the soil. If you lay it on the soil at this sort of time of year, autumn time, by the spring, it'll all be sort of taken down into the soil. So if you allow the natural processes of the soil to do your job for you, it's much less disruptive than digging, and easier as well. So just to summarize that, with traditional soil improvement, as we've sort of all come to know and love, you're increasing the organic matter, which enables you to grow traditional garden plants, which creates a higher maintenance environment. The plants are softer, sappier, spoilt. And also, very often you get this, when you get a bit of rain, you get this flush of weeds coming through. And then, as I mentioned, there's this danger of what I call a sort of generic garden look. Whereas if you have something like a sandy, poor or chalky soil, you have an opportunity to work with the soil and make space. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. And make space for natural processes. And that can give you a greater biodiversity. You know, if you think about John Little's mosaic gardens, there's lots of different microclimates under bricks, under rocks, and that gives you an opportunity for greater biodiversity. Your plants grow up more resilient. You don't get this flush of weeds coming through as soon as it rains, because it's a more challenging environment. But I think the challenge for us is the aesthetic, because it's not what we're used to. So yes, so that was my slide on clearing and protecting. And then we've just covered sort of protecting and preserving plants and increasing biodiversity, planting natives or climate resilient plants. And of course, source locally if you possibly can. I mean, here in the UK, I do feel we've got a bit of a crisis, that lots of smaller nurseries are closing down, and as well as losing you know, the nurseries themselves, we're also losing a tremendous repository of talent, knowledge, when you see local growers, small nurseries closing down, you know, family companies, small family companies closing down, and that knowledge is being lost. So I do think it's really important, if we possibly can, to source locally for so many reasons. But then moving on to maintenance, with low maintenance gardens, we're given the opportunity to minimize the amount of digging that we're doing, the irrigation that we're doing. We can compost and look after our soil. We can use low carbon tools. A lot of people now are going over to electric tools, which of course are much better for the environment, and minimizing the use of chemicals, of course. All those choices we can make, composting, soil care, electric tools, we can make, we can make those choices as we're maintaining our gardens. Thinking about the sustainability of your garden goes right through the life of the garden, right from clearing, building, planting, into maintaining over the years. So I return to this very traditional garden, but we also have the opportunity to think about that sort of natural beauty, which we all love in the natural environment. But I think the question is, can we get used to something more akin to this in our garden setting? Is that something that in some situations we should be thinking about doing? And this is a slide that Peter Korn allowed me to use of his sandy garden. You've probably heard of his work on sandy gardens. It's very different from the traditional English garden, but I think you'll probably agree it's also very, very beautiful. So if you're thinking that you want to know a little bit more and delve into this subject, help hand with my book. Start with soil, simple steps for a thriving garden. And in the book, I touch on a bit of soil science and the beautiful complexity of soil and the organisms, the networks within soil. But then it's also very practical as well. So I give you tips for getting to know your own soil, testing and getting to know your own soil. What kind of soil is it? Is it poor? Is it already quite fertile? And then there's some troubleshooting in it, and lists of plants for the different types of soil. So if you're struggling with a heavy clay soil and wondering what on earth to plant or how to manage that claggy, wet, cold clay, then I've got hints and tips for that sort of thing as well. So thank you very much for listening. And I don't know if anybody's got any questions, but I'd be very happy to answer if you have.
Thanks, Juliet. Yeah, as I say, do pop anything in the chat if you'd like to. There's a lot there. It was really incredible presentation. Yeah, lots of thoughts. For me, it's extraordinary how quickly we forget, even though if we've tested the soil as gardeners or as designers or landscape architects and done a test and then go back to a site and see what's there or start to plan with the plants, and how quickly we forget about what's underneath all of that planting that we're planning because we can't see it. It's such a sort of psychological thing in a way, isn't it? What lies beneath, it's just a simple thing as that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's when I started to think more about soil, I thought, all this time I haven't really, as you say, we test it and we sort of think about it, but there's so much in soil, and I think the scientists are only just really getting to grips with it, but there's a lot of information, a lot of research being done, a lot of information coming out about soil, and I think perhaps gardeners or garden makers have been a bit left behind. We haven't really been keeping up to date with the new knowledge, and it's very exciting what's going on in the world of soil science.
Yeah. Just from Wendy. Wendy Hilty, thanks so much. That gave me so much to think about. I am in South Carolina and on sand over clay, and this is so useful. So that's great. Thanks, Wendy. Juliet, do you want to come out of screen share for a moment? I know that we've got you in the
Oh
down
yes,
left-hand
stop
corner, which
there.
is great.
There we go.
Yeah, great. And there you are. For me, one of the things for me is the kids that you worked with is really interesting. Is there anything that came up that they were sort of engaging with you with about climate, and I don't know, what takeaways did you get that
We
stay with
had
you about, because they're the future, you know. And
yes.
I think it's really important. It's so important to engage kids.
Yeah, I love, any opportunity really that I get to engage children in gardens and gardening, because I think if you ask a group of adults who are interested in gardening, I don't know, maybe 80% of people will say that they have fond memories of gardening as a child with grandpa or mum, and very often I think the roots of our gardening passion are there in childhood, even if in teenage years you move away from it, you tend to come back if you've got that childhood experience. So I think it's so important. And we had some lovely creating the Blue Peter Garden. We had some lovely workshops with children from Salford. Actually, they came to RHS Bridgewater, and we did a workshop with natural soil pigments, because you can, if you travel the world, there are so many different kinds of soil, and a lot of them have really beautiful vibrant colors. So yeah, I mean, the artists among you will know about burnt umber and sienna, the verdigris. I think there are various soil pigments that are well known to artists, but there are hundreds of them, loads and loads. And so we got hold of soil pigments, soil paints, which you can actually get, and I had a wonderful workshop where they painted soil mini beasts. So I took them photographs of mini beasts, and they painted the mini beasts out of soil pigments, and we spent a day sort of talking about it and going out into the garden and looking at the worms, and it was lovely,
Great.
really lovely.
Great. One of our viewers has said, most enjoyable, you are such a natural presenter. I'm with you on right plant for the environment as opposed to high maintenance. Do you have any compost tips for food waste? I'd like to compost my own at home.
Yeah, so I think it's great to compost food waste if you have space to have a compost heap in the garden. Then that's a great thing to do, to mix your food waste with your garden waste, because you need to get a balance between the sort of green waste from the garden and the food waste, but also you need the woody waste as well. So you do it in layers, sort of food and green clippings, and then woody stuff, and then food and green clippings and woody stuff. If you've got space to do that in the garden, that's fabulous. If you haven't got space and really all you can manage is just the food waste, it's a good idea to go for something like a wormery or a bokashi bin, and that will compost just the food waste, and you don't have to go into the more space consuming traditional compost.
And obviously with the food waste, you have to have a somewhat sealed unit, just in terms of potential vermin coming in.
Yes,
that can be an
yes,
issue.
it can.
If you've not done that before, but yeah. I know I've been aware of that being in the countryside here. Not to encourage that, but yeah, that's great.
And
I'm really
the other thing, sorry, Richard, the other thing,
no.
of course, is there are certain things not to put. So don't put things like citrus in your compost. And Richard, you've reminded me, don't put things like meat and fish, because it is vegetable matter.
Yeah. One more thing for me, I'm curious about the Barn conversion. It's stonery, is it? How the client is responding to what you're doing. Obviously, they chose you, so they're trusting of what you're doing. But in terms of the rubble and using what's there, because I'm very pro about working with what you have and not trying to bring things in or take things out off site.
Yeah. So yes, no. So they are their brief was for it to be as sustainable as possible, and they're very, because it's not actually in the South Downs National Park, it's close to the South Downs National Park. So the whole thing about sensitivity to the landscape is really important, and was important to them personally. So no, they're definitely up for it. But we've also got, what I didn't mention was that at the back where I showed you, the old farmyard, that was very much the old tarmac and concrete. So we're going to do the rubble garden there. But the other side of the house, the illustration that I showed you of the sort of rolling hill, that is a different environment, because there the topsoil is deeper and it's been more like pasture land and previously gardened. So there we're going to do a more not traditional, but probably more like meadow-like / prairie style, because the soil there is deeper and will sustain that sort of thing. So again, we're working with the existing microclimates on the site, which happen to be deeper soil on one side and then basically no soil on the other side.
Great. Well, there's some really, really valuable talk. I hope that it's going to help help some people rethink in terms of carrying their designs forward with the soil in mind, and gardeners as well, and just not sort of relying on what you think you know all the time, and just questioning that all the time. I think in terms of soil, because it's not, as you know, as you say, and in the book as well, there is such little known and research is going on, but such little known about what's down there really, and how it's all working together with all the plants as well.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think we sort of, as human beings, we sort of crash about the world or crash about the earth, doing damage that we don't realize we're doing, because we don't understand the complexities of what's going. And I think that's very true. I think it's true of the sea as well, isn't it? These environments that we know so little of, I think it's better that we do as little as we can, because we don't know the effects.
And if you don't know, then don't. Then perhaps
Don't.
stop and take a breath, and have a think.
Yes.
But so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go on. It's a really great talk. Thanks everybody for joining us, wherever you're joining us from. Go and check out their website if you've got any constructive feedback for Annie and Noel about the new website, and check everything else that's going on. But have a great evening, Juliet, and thanks again.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks.